Metro Exodus is a fantastic title that I just recently got into. It's one of those little gems that you really didn't hear that much about, not to the degree that it deserved anyways. While by no means a perfect game, it was fantastic and definitely deserved a lot more attention and recognition for just being a really well-crafted adventure. I intend to do a review video on the entire game, but right now we're going to talk about one of the biggest strengths and at the same time one of the biggest weaknesses of the game, the pacing. Metro is a great example of how pacing can make or break a game, and it somehow manages to do both.
Did you hear that? Again! Watchmen! Did I get you? No? Good.
Metro's action set pieces tend to be claustrophobic. They tend to be intense, rapid fire, in your face, gritty, nasty, and I love it. Although there's many moments of the game that takes place out in the open, it really feels the best, especially the combat when you're in the tight, narrow, confined spaces of an underground bunker, the cave, the twisting tunnels of the underground subways, or the cramped, dilapidated offices of giant, hollowed-out husks of buildings. Pacing of these moments are frantic. It makes you feel slightly out of control. It makes you feel the intensity of combat. A battle, whether we're talking about fisticuffs, gunplay, or the nitty-gritty of a knife fight, tend to be fraught with a lot of mistakes, fumbling, and otherwise uncoordinated ugliness. Metro made me feel like this in the way that an FPS game hasn't in a very long time, and I really appreciated that element. Technically, you can stealth your way through the game, but honestly, as soon as I got the taste of that really intense rush of an in-close encounter, going in guns blazing, shotgun, assault rifle, whatever it may be, I really couldn't care less about the stealth. No offense to anyone who dug that part of it. Sure, it's probably pretty well designed. It seems like they put some effort into it. But honestly, as soon as I got my hands on a shotgun and I could go in and double tap someone point blank and then rush to the next victim, I really couldn't have cared less. However, Metro Exodus is no Doom. As much as there are those frantic, intense, breakneck-paced moments, they're offset by the contrast of some very slow, methodical, and sometimes plotting moments. When it doesn't land so well, you really feel it. It slows the game down, and it can really make things almost unbearable. But when they nail it, they really nail it. When it's at its best, Metro uses its downtime to set up the action and make a wonderful contrast between the slow, methodical pace of adventuring through the wastelands and the absolute frenetic pacing of its combat encounters, whether that be with the human bandits, the mutant monsters that roam the wasteland, or the combinations of both. There's a slow, exploratory pace when you're wandering through the wastelands of the open world maps, searching for resources, points of interest, bandit camps, nests of monsters, or anything else of note. The exploratory portion of each map tends to be a little on the slow side, but it works in the game's favor when it calls into sharper contrast the intensity of the moment-to-moment battles. The maps are fairly interesting all in all in terms of locations. There's plenty of ruins, blown out structures, caves, tunnels, bunkers, monster nests, bandit camps, and all the like. There are occasions of something akin to side quests, but for the most part, you're mostly just exploring for supplies and information much more than you are actual quests like a standard RPG. The environmental design really does a lot of heavy lifting in these areas, as even though the combat is very engaging and fun, it doesn't always look all that different from encounter to encounter. There are certainly exceptions to this, but most of those exceptions are contained within the story beats itself, as opposed to the free wandering and the stuff that you just find on your own throughout the world. And even though I wouldn't say that I ever got tired of the combat or the gunplay, there's not really enough unique looks to each one for that to be the sole motivator of exploring. So while exploration doesn't have its appeal in terms of new quests and new story beats, exploration doesn't really have an appeal in terms of unique encounters and things like that. What it does have is a necessity through crafting, through resource gathering, and through inventory management. You really have to go out and find as much as you can in order to have enough firepower to survive. It also has an excellent presentation in terms of environmental splendor. There's a lot of areas of the game that I went to go check out just because they looked cool and unique and interesting. That serves the game really well. It really needed that because there's not much else meat on the bone, just purely in terms of exploration. That being said, exploring does do a lot of work to setting a distinction in the tone. Because there's so much downtime and so much methodical aspects to the exploration, to the inventory management, to taking care of your equipment, to getting new resources, all of these things that you have to do that take their time, that brings into sharp contrast whenever you get into a particularly intense encounter. And it can get pretty intense. Obviously, there's a lot of things in this scene that come together to make it really interesting and engaging. The tone of this scene, the lighting, the claustrophobic, cramped nature of the tunnels, the looming threat of all of the seen and unseen dangers. But another thing that makes this area stand out in particular is the pacing on both sides of this encounter. And in both instances, it's a great example of both what is good and bad about the pacing. Why the pacing is a strength and why it can be a weakness. It's a strength because some of the events before this scene and after this scene really set it apart and make it really clear that here is your action, here is the excitement, here is the tension, here is the real meat of the game. Before and after this area or scene, we see the strengths of the pacing being used to slow the game down. This makes the tension and the action of this area that much stronger, and it really leaves a better impression for it. So it's a really strong point to bookend it on slower moments to make this really come together. But there's a downside to that. The area directly after this portion of the game is about 15 minutes, give or take, of pretty much nothing burger. There's no action, there's no combat, there's no escalating tension because we've already had all the tension with the scorpions in the first place. We wander around, we do a little bit of looting, we see a whole bunch of rubble, a couple of dead bodies, and that's it. Even the dead bodies in this part of the game aren't that interesting. And that's saying something, because there's a lot of interesting dead bodies in this game. It's some downtime that was much needed after all that of combat, but ultimately it drags. On the other hand, before we get into the tunnels with the scorpions, we end up having a lengthy conversation with this gentleman and his, friends. This conversation takes 40 minutes to get through. I timed it, and I watched the whole thing. It is worth noting that it's a pretty interesting conversation. The guy's fucking kookier than corn puffs, but it's 40 minutes. It's also optional, so I will give it that. I probably didn't have to sit there the entire time and listen to him. Maybe I did. I don't even know what happens if you don't. I listen to him. The problem is that I, like probably many gamers out there, are going to sit through the extra dialogue for the most part to see what happens, to see if there's a point to it, to see what the payoff is. And ultimately, there really wasn't one other than a really weird dude telling some interesting stories. The writing wasn't bad, so I can't ding it for that. But just the sheer amount of time it took, it was excessive. And that really is, in a singular instance, the issue with the pacing of this game. It's both good and bad. It's a strength and a weakness. The pacing is necessary to make the intense and rapid fire moments really shine and stand out, and they accomplish that spectacularly. However, there's more than a few moments where this just goes overboard, and we go from a great touch of pacing and a display of patience on the part of the developer, and straight into, okay, when are we going to get through this? I'm ready for something else. Sometimes the pacing dragging and the moments between stretching further and further almost get to the point where you're like, okay, this is too much and I'm kind of done. And then right afterwards, you get to that brilliant moment that just breaks it up and makes it great.
You alive there? Goddamn! Eat this!
I mean, come on. Did you fucking see that, Bear? Give me a break. Another example where this is both brilliant and horrible is the lead up to the final area of the game. Now, I'm not going to hit you guys with too much spoilers, but a tiny bit of spoilers. So if you really want to go into the final area of the game with nothing seen at all, which I do kind of recommend because it's a great part of the game, you might want to skip ahead to the time on screen. All right, the lead up to the final area of the game, just to get everything introduced and set the scene and the pacing of it all, is about 20 to 30 minutes before things start getting interesting. Which isn't to say the lead up in and of itself isn't interesting, but like so much of the rest of the pacing, it is slow, it is methodical, and it takes its time. Maybe a little bit too much. It's not to say that it doesn't serve a purpose, because it very clearly does. The mood is great as we go into this, and I really think without all the lead in and build up beforehand, the final part of the game would really not have been so spectacular. It does start to drag. And again, I went into the final area with this feeling of, okay, all right, okay, when are we going to get to something? When does it get interesting? When does it get good? And right as I get past the point of the intro overstaying its welcome and it's starting to almost get boring.
Let's see how you like some of this! Another grave. What the hell? Open fire! You're right! Why?
I know the whole point of this video has been to establish that the pacing is both good and bad in this game. And I wish I could make some kind of recommendation or statement or grand insight as to how the developer could have made this all strength and no drawback. But the honest truth is that I'm just some guy on the internet. What the fuck do I know about how to properly balance pacing in a game as big as this? Or really any game at all for that matter. All I know is that I distinctly remember several times in the game where I really kind of wished it would pick up a little bit, and I felt like it was dragging its feet. And I also recognize that if you had taken some of the things that created that issue in the first place out of the game would have been poorer for it. Every time that I started to feel that feeling of, okay, this is taking too long, I'm really starting to want things to change up, it would change up. So maybe, in the end, Metro got its pacing perfect. There's obviously some variance for personal preference. Some people like really slow-paced games, way slower than this. Some people like games that don't stop for the entire time. A Doom Eternal, if you will. Although really, if we look at that, even that has some pacing to it. In the end, I don't think this game would have been as awesome and memorable if the pacing hadn't been just where it was. It really needed its slow, quiet moments, not just for the pacing of the game in terms of gameplay, but also to develop the characters, to develop the stories, to develop the setting, to give it a flavor all its own. If we had been balls to the wall the entire time, none of that would have sunk in. And I also feel like I wouldn't have enjoyed the game nearly as much without those really intense, frantic, sometimes frightening moments. If you take nothing away from this video, it should be that pacing can make or break a game. It can entirely change the flavor of a game. Pacing can be one of the key components to really set the game's mood, and Metro Exodus is a great example of that. Actually, if you take nothing else away from this video, it should be that you need to play Metro Exodus. It is a gem that is undeservedly unrepresented in the market, and it needs more players. Go play it now. Thanks for watching the video, guys. I'm still getting my feet wet making this type of video, and I'm hoping that the quality improves as I go along. I think this is better than my last one. I'm hoping the next one will be better than this one. I do intend to get a Metro Exodus review up and a couple of other videos just discussing certain themes and aspects of the game. So if you enjoyed this, there should be more videos of this type that you might like in the future. If you want to see more game discussions, reviews, and other content from me, make sure that you subscribe and turn your notifications on. Leave me a like. Tell me what you thought of this video. Tell me where you think I can improve. And give me your opinion on Metro Exodus in general. I'd love to have a discussion. Thanks for watching.